Dodge is pushing to still join the Cup Series by 2027, and a fan heckled Daniel Suarez after the race at the Daytona 500. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're first going to take a look at a ton of paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple of days. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into them. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Noah Gragson's 2026 Straight Talk Wireless scheme that we'll see at Phoenix in a couple weeks. Scheme looks alright in my opinion. I do like the colors on the car. I do like the greenish color. I do like the black number. It does look alright and it looks okay. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Spencer Boyd's 2026 Interstate Classic Cars team that I believe we'll see this weekend at Atlanta. Truck looks alright in my opinion. Good to see a new sponsor working with Spencer Boyd. Great to see it in the sport. Truck looks okay. The next paint schemes we're taking a look at is Carson Ospar Michael McDowell's 2026 Delaware Life schemes that we'll see this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Both trucks looked pretty good. I do like the look of them, like the blue look, the Delaware Life look we've seen in the past from the team. Looks pretty good. Colors look pretty awesome. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Brendan Poole's 2026 Blacks Island scheme that I believe we'll see this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway. This scheme's alright in my opinion. I think there's some good things about it, and it's awesome to see a new sponsor coming in to work with Brendan Poole. I think that's great and good to see. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Cole Custer's 2026 Andy's Frozen Custard scheme that we'll see for multiple races, including this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway. The classic Andy's Frozen Custard look. It looks really awesome. I think the Haas Factory team absolutely knocked this one out of the park. The colors on it match perfectly to the look of the Andy's Frozen Custard look. It looks awesome. Looking forward to the racetrack at Atlanta. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Michael McDowell's 2026 B-Laster scheme that we'll see in 2 NASCAR Cup races, including this weekend. Looks very similar to one he had in 2025, but I do think the colors on this car look pretty good. It's nice to see a new car for McDowell. Looking forward to the racetrack at Atlanta. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ryan Preece's 2026 Red Baron scheme that we'll see this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway. I actually like the look of this car quite a bit. I think if they took the white outline, the RFK look on the side, I think this scheme would be perfect, but I think it does look really good. The colors look pretty solid. Good to see Red Baron on the car. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Justin Haley's 2026 Ram scheme that we'll see this weekend at Atlanta. This is a test scheme they had, I believe, at Rockingham, and they felt really happy to bring this scheme back. I actually like the look of this truck. The golden yellow number is my favorite part of it, but you got the golden yellow look of the Ram logo on there. I think that's what makes this game look really solid. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Jeff Burton's 2026 Spray Away scheme that we'll see this weekend at Atlanta. I like the look of this car somewhat. It's good to see Spray Away back working with Burn like they did last year. Colors work solidly, and it's a pretty good looking car. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ross Chastain's 2026 Protect Your Melon scheme that we'll see in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series race at Atlanta. Looks similar to one he had when he drove for DGM Racing, a couple of teams and organizations. I think this one looks solid. It's not the most spectacular, but good to see Protect Your Melon back with Ross. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Mason Maggio's 2026 Free Rent scheme that we'll see in the O'Reilly Auto Parts race at Atlanta. Scheme looks okay in my opinion. I do think there's some good things about the car. Excited to see this car out on the racetrack this weekend at Atlanta. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Josh Williams' 2026 CallA11.com scheme that we'll see this week in Atlanta and a couple of the races throughout the year as well. They've had a partnership with Josh Williams for many, many years. Good to see him back in the sport once again and working with Josh Williams for races in 2026. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Tyler Reddick's 2026 Pinnacle scheme that we'll see this weekend at Atlanta. Looks similar to one he had in 2025, but I think there's some good colors on this car for sure. Good to see Pinnacle once again back working with Tyler Reddick in 2026. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Connor Zilich's 2026 Tootsie scheme that we'll see this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Unfortunately, I'm going to crown this as my least favorite Trackhouse design scheme they've had in the 6 years they've been around. I am not a big fan of this one. This is a downgrade from last year's Tootsie scheme. I thought when they got Zilich, they were going to do something really awesome with this car, but I think once again, this is a massive and really unfortunate downgrade, which sucks to see because I like the Tootsie's cars a lot, but I think this one is a pretty big downgrade. Not a fan of this one. It doesn't look good, and it's a very disappointing car. I'm not looking forward to see this one as much on the racetrack. It doesn't look great, and I don't like the look of the car overall, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about hospitality. As it was reported by Adam Stern earlier today, But NASCAR quietly introduced a new ultra premium concept last Sunday at Daytona called 1948. This concept is very similar to some of the things that Formula One has been doing with their paddocks for a very, very long time. I gotta say, looking at some of the designs and the concepts they've had for this, I think is really good to see. And I think this is going to be at every single event in 2026 for the NASCAR Cup Series. I don't think it'll be introduced for the O'Reilly Auto Parts or the Craftsman Truck Series. But I think this kind of thing they're doing, I think is really awesome to see. I want to see more stuff like this going into the future. And I think that something like this is going to happen because I think the sport needs to grow in some big way. I think it's great to see they're doing something like this and good to see a new hospitality type of thing coming into play in the 2026 NASCAR season. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Michael McDowell. As it was reported by the NASCAR Insights account earlier today or yesterday that Michael McDowell ran the final 166 miles and final 66 laps without pitting during the Daytona 500, which equates to 165 miles. That is the longest run in the next gen era, breaking the previous record, I believe, by Eric Jones or another driver where they ran 161 miles, I believe, in the Daytona 500 not too long ago. It's very rare to see this where you have a lot of miles, but obviously with the fuel saving in the next gen car, especially with the Dragonite, you see a lot of fuel saving. These guys are going half throttle, which could lead the drivers spending a lot less time on pit road and spending more time out on the racetrack. Hopefully that we can see something change about the fuel saving going forward, but I think that it's interesting and I think it's kind of crazy and kind of impressive in a sense to see Michael McDowell break that record, have 165 miles. I think that's impressive. You don't see that anymore at super speedways most of the time. Kind of a crazy stat to look back on. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Craig Skinner. As it was announced earlier today that Craig Skinner has officially left Red Bull Racing effective immediately. Craig Skinner has been at Red Bull since the beginning of their organization in 2006 when the organization came to play about 20 years ago, and one of the original designers is no longer with the team. This is a major, major loss for Red Bull, and Red Bull has continued to lose a lot of big name individuals. They've lost Adrian Newey. They lost a lot of big names who've gone over to different organizations. Christian Horner, who is linked to multiple different organizations, including, I believe, maybe an organization like Alpine, if I'm not mistaken. And, of course, other big names have left, like Marco. And I do believe Helmut Marko. I think that Red Bull is going to be in a very interesting position long term with them losing a lot of these big name individuals. I do think there are some definitely big concerns about the long term future for Red Bull, which is why I think down the road Max Verstappen might end up, in fact, leaving Red Bull to go and do something, which we know Brad Keselowski is trying to introduce Max Verstappen to NASCAR at this point. So I think it's a big loss for Red Bull, but it's not shocking and surprising considering some of the rumors we've heard, and kind of crazy to see that he has effectively left Red Bull Racing at this particular moment. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Atlanta Motor Speedway. As it was reported by many reporters in the industry, including Bob Pockrass, that for this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway, there is going to be a new tire on the right side of tires for the NASCAR Cup Series. Now, the O'Reilly Auto Parts and the NASCAR Craftsman Trucks will have the same tires they've had pretty much every single year since they started running new Atlanta in 2022. The hope is for more tire wear on the right side because they'll be running the same tires that we have seen at all the other intermediate tracks where those tracks have gotten increased tire wear in the last couple of years. I think this is certainly interesting. Now, I do believe, especially with the new tire, they probably should have a little bit of a warm-up session to make sure drivers do get acclimated to the new tires that are going to be used. But more tire wear is not a bad thing. To spread the pack out especially, and I think in the future down the road, you're going to see Atlanta potentially widen out, which I think that is not a bad thing at this particular point, especially with more tire wear being a factor. I think a lot of fans are going to like the racing. So I think a change like this is actually a really good move. I think it's a good decision to go in that direction, and I'm glad to see we'll see some more tire wear going forward in the future for this weekend at Atlanta. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about DGM Racing. As it was announced late last night that DGM Racing will continue their partnership with Jesse Lugin Motorsports in 2026. Reminder, going into last year, they announced a technical partnership with the Jesse Wuji Motorsports organization for 2025, and it was unknown if that partnership was going to continue for 2026, which means we might see some people associated with Jesse Wuji be at the racetrack quite a bit, and also I would expect that maybe down the road we'll see Jesse Wuji in a race or two, maybe driving the 91, since the 91 car is going to have a lot of different drivers behind the wheel, including Mason Maggio, who is going to drive the 91 car this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway. I think it's great to see this partnership is going to continue. I expect this team hopefully to continue their improved performance. I think that despite what a lot of people say about Jesse, I think he's a much better car owner than a driver. So I think that maybe DJM will continue to improve as an organization. We'll see if that continues, and we'll see if the team continues going in a really good direction long time forward into the future. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Circuit de Catalunya, as it was announced Monday morning that Catalunya will continue hosting F1 races in 2028, 2030, and 2032, announcing a multi-year extension with the racetrack. What this means more than likely with Barcelona coming in on the schedule, I believe for 2026, that means that I don't think they'll be hosting any races in 2027 at Catalunya. So maybe they'll be doing something similar where they'll have an alternate. One year they go to the streets of Barcelona for like 2027, and then of course in 2020 or Madrid or something like that, and then in 2028 they go to Catalunya. And I think that is an interesting way to go about it with the Spanish Grand Prix, to have maybe multiple different options and venues you could use so you can continue racing in the area of Formula One in Spain, because there's a lot of people from Spain that are major fans of Formula One. I think it's an interesting move. Glad to see that Catalunya will continue being on the schedule, at least for the foreseeable future. I like seeing stuff like this, and I do think it's great to see there'll be Formula One races continuing to be hosted at the track. I think it's a great track for racing, and I think it'll be fun for a long time down the road, as it will continue being on the schedule for at least a couple more years. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Tyler Tomasi. As it was announced yesterday that Tyler Tomasi will drive the number 69 truck for MBM Motorsports this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Tyler Tomasi attempted to qualify for the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race at Daytona International Speedway last weekend. Unfortunately, because they didn't have any sort of pace and speed, and they didn't have enough owners points to make the show, they unfortunately failed to qualify for the event. The good news this weekend for Tyler Tomasi, they will make the event because there's only 36 trucks that are showing up this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Tyler thinks a decent race car driver, but unfortunately the equipment he's in is not the fast equipment. But luckily they will be able to start building up some of those owners points. You don't have the 4 trucks showing up that Cletus Afron ran in. You don't have the 27 trucks showing up. You don't have some other trucks showing up this week, which is a big reason why this is happening. Nonetheless, I hope Tyler can have a really strong run with this team and program. I think MBM is a solid organization. Of course, they made the Daytona 500. They're not going to be in the Cup Series race with Casey Mears because they made the show in the event. We'll see what Tyler can do as he gets a chance to drive the 69 once again at Atlanta. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Cody Ware. As it was announced yesterday that Cody Ware will drive the 30 for Barracuda Racing this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Cody Ware's brother Carson Ware did, of course, run the number 30 car at Daytona International Speedway, made the show, finished, I believe, around the 20th position, but he got into some beef with Carson Hocevar in that same race. Cody Ware, when you look at his stats, he did get a top 20 finish at Daytona International Speedway, and he did actually lead a few laps in the Daytona 500. Now, realistically, I don't see this car having a ton of pace and speed. I think there's going to be some struggles with the pace and speed with this car because I just didn't really see a ton of speed out at Daytona from the 30. They were nearly a lap down just on pure pace and speed, so I'm not expecting Cody to show a lot of great things. We'll see if he can prove me wrong and have a good run, but like I said, I'm just not expecting much. Unfortunately, I don't think the speed is going to be there. I don't think there will be a good run for Cody Ware this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the World Endurance Championship. As it was announced earlier this afternoon that the World Endurance Championship will continue to be on the Warner Brothers channels through 2030. This includes Eurosport, also includes TNT, and it also includes HBO Max and a couple other companies as well associated with the Warner Brothers. I have watched quite a few World Endurance Championship races in my time, and I think when you look at the broadcast of World Endurance Championship, especially for the Le Mans 24 hours that they have, among other races they have, like of course some of the big races like the Abu Dhabi 24 hours they had, I do believe that this is a really good series when it comes to racing, and the World Endurance Championship is continuing to expand and grow as a series as a whole. So I think it's exciting to see that they will continue being on the Warner Brothers group, at least for the foreseeable future. And I think especially with TNT, which we don't know how long the portfolio is going to be around, because of Warner Brothers, there's a lot of restructuring going on currently at the moment with the Warner Brothers group at this point. So I think there is somewhat of concern when you look at that situation for the Warner Bros. And anything associated like Discovery Plus, which is another channel they're going to be on. But I do think it's good the World Endurance Championship will continue having some races on the Warner Brothers group going into this upcoming year. I think it's going to be a fun season, some big events happening there. I'm looking forward to watch some of those races throughout the 2026 season for the WEC as new manufacturers look to come in and build upon their presence in the series. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jose Cuervo. As it was reported by Adam Stern earlier this afternoon that Jose Cuervo is currently in talks to sponsor a team in the future, and they're beginning to have talks and conversations along with working with NASCAR for 2026. Now, they did not exactly say which team and organization could be that team that picks up the Jose Cuervo sponsorship for the 2026 year. If I had to guess, I think there's a few different teams you could absolutely look at. One team I'd be looking at is 2311 Racing, and I think you most be looking at Tyler Reddick. Tyler Reddick, of course, has lost Monster Energy and stuff associated with that, and some of the big sponsors like McDonald's, which was closely aligned with 2311 Racing, but they left at the end of this past year. They need a big sponsor to come in and work with the team. And I think Jose Cuervo working with 2311 Racing would absolutely make the most sense to me, because I think you look at Tyler Reddick, he won the Daytona 500, and I think them working with him, like I said, would make the most sense. And I hope it does happen for Tyler Reddick, that he's able to pick up some big sponsorship this season, because I want to see Reddick have a ton of success. He deserves to be in the sport. He always does a really good job with 2311. I think he's expected to have a really big year, and I think he is going to have a really strong year with this team and program in 2026. So I'm really excited about that for the year. I'm looking forward to see what he can do in 2026. And I hope that the Jose Cuervo sponsorship does work with other teams. Maybe they work with Kyle Busch and go, even though Kyle Busch does have some alcohol sponsors like Rebel Bourbon, so that probably wouldn't happen. But why not get Jose Cuervo? I think that'd be fun for Kyle Busch or someone else. Maybe they sponsor Shane Van Gisbergen. I think that would certainly be interesting. But we'll see what happens with the sponsorship side of things, and we'll see who they end up working with in 2026 on the sponsorship front this upcoming year and this upcoming season. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the St. Petersburg NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series broadcast. Now, with, of course, St. Petersburg hosting the Truck Series race, there also is going to be the IndyCar race going on in the streets of St. Petersburg as well. And for the Truck Series race, multiple IndyCar personnel are going to be joining the booth and also going to be joining on pit road. Townsend Bell will be joining Jamie Little and Michael Waltrip in the booth for the Craftsman Truck Series event. While Georgia Henneberry, who joined Fox last year, she will be on pit road, and she'll be joining Amanda Busick on pit road as well. These are two individuals part of the IndyCar broadcast that I'm huge fans of. Beginning with Townsend Bell. I think Townsend Bell is going to do a really good job. Now, I'll be honest here. As much as I think it's cool they're bringing Townsend Bell, I really think Will Buxton should have been the one calling this race, or Eric Brennan should have been the one calling this race. Again, I talk about Jamie Little. No disrespect her. She is a very solid pit road reporter, and she would fit really well on pit road. She is not a good play-by-play announcer, but I think that Townsend Bell going in there, he's going to do a really good job, and I think he'll do a really good job with the coverage. As for Georgia Henneberry, she is really good on pit road. She also did some NASCAR coverage a few years back for MRN and PRN, I'm pretty sure. So she has prior experience being on the NASCAR side of things. So she knows some of these drivers that are going to be competing in this race, like Jimmy Johnson, for example. And I do think she'll do a really good job because she always does a fantastic job on pit road. I like what they're doing with the St. Pete side of things. It seems like Fox is taking some things seriously. I appreciate they're actually making some moves to try to make their programming a little bit better and a little bit stronger. We'll see if they can have some benefit from it and see some good things and hopefully some good returns. I think it's good to see, though, that they'll be having a St. Petersburg broadcast and have some people from the truck side and some people from the IndyCar side working with that in 2026. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Juiceon Hamilton. As it was announced yesterday morning that Juiceon Hamilton will officially become the president at Alpha Prime Racing effective immediately. Many of you are going to know that name. Juiceon Hamilton was the leader of race control for a few years in NASCAR after I believe David Hoos left in around 2018 to 2019. Juiceon Hamilton would be one of the lead people. Tim Berman is another guy who, of course, did call the race for the Daytona 500 this year. And there definitely was a lot of controversy surrounding Juiceon Hamilton when it came to the way he called races in NASCAR races, especially because there was a lot of officiating issues that came into play. NASCAR near the end of 2025, around the time of Kansas happened, or near the middle portion around the week of Kansas, it was announced that he would no longer be working with NASCAR and was pretty much let go and fired. Now, Juiceon Hamilton, despite this, does have a ton of experience. Now, what does this mean for Tommy Joe Martins, one of the owners of the team? What this means is that Tommy Joe Martins won't have many different roles. So he'll be the owner of the organization. Him and Cesar Bacaro will be the main owners of the group. But Juiceon is going to be overseeing the group and be president of the team. I actually have a little bit of confidence that Juiceon, especially in less of a stressful environment calling races, I think he will do a really good job being the president at the team. Because when you look at Alpha Prime Racing, they're an organization that I feel like has been on the up and up. Brendan Poole had a really strong run at Daytona, nearly winning, and Brendan Poole has been punching above his weight with that Alpha Prime Racing team. And they, of course, have LeVar Scott this year, who finished in the top 20, mind you, and I feel like LeVar Scott could have a really big year in 2026, where he did score a top 20 finish in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series event. I really do feel like that Juiceon coming in there, I think he will show some good stuff with the team, and I do think that they are going to actually not regret bringing him into the program. Again, there are people that aren't the biggest fan of Juiceon, but I do believe that he is going to do a very solid job working with this team and working with this organization, and I think it's an exciting time if you're a fan of new people coming in, because I do think, like I said, there's some good things that can come from this. I think there's some exciting things that come from this in the future. I like seeing this move, and I really hope for Alpha Prime Racing it means great things. I do have good feelings about the team. I think his team is headed in the right direction. He just picked up some new sponsors, so that's some good stuff to see. I'm really happy about it nonetheless, and great to see that he's getting the chance and opportunity to work with the team and program effectively, as Tommy will help with the transition for the spotter side of things and help with the transition for the side of things of sending over the presidency over to Juiceon Hamilton. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Tyler Reif. As it was announced earlier this afternoon that Tyler Reif will drive the number 42 truck for Nice Motorsports this Saturday at Atlanta Motor Speedway. This is the first of many scheduled starts that Tyler Reif is going to have in the number 42 truck this year. Last year, of course, Travis Strana drove the number 42 truck to a top 15 finish. Tyler Reif, in my opinion, I think is a pretty underrated race car driver. He did show some stuff in the ARCA Menard Series. He is still one of the youngest winners in the ARCA Menard Series when he won the ARCA and ARCA West combination race back in 2023 at Phoenix at the age of 15 years old. And Tyler Reif also did show some promise. He did not win the ARCA East Championship last year. Came very close to winning it, but Isaac Kitzmiller was the driver who picked up the win in that championship. But in the race that he ran at ARCA, especially with a team he drove for, which I think was a Cook Racing team or something similar to that, he did run really well. I think it's actually Sigma Performance Services. He ran really well with that team and that organization. Realistically, I think depending on how, because we don't know exactly how many races he is going to run, because he's split in that truck most of the year with him, Connor Jones, and Parker Eatman, who's going to make a few starts later in the season. In fact, I think Parker confirmed during the test that he's going to run Rockingham in April. So I do think that Tyler has a lot to live up to, but I think he's got a great chance and opportunity to work with Nice, who showed some promise in some of the races that they ran. I'm excited for Tyler to get the chance and opportunity to work with this team. I think he's going to do a pretty solid job working with the team and program, and I think he'll have a good year with the team. I knew it was exciting when he was announced to go to the team. I'm looking forward to see what he can do this weekend in the Truck Series race at Atlanta Motor Speedway. A great and awesome opportunity for him going into this event. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Dodge and Ram. Now we're going to talk about Dodge to the Cup Series here in just a short little bit. But this is about a potential merger between Dodge and Ram. As there was reported by Adam Stern late last night in a report that came out from Mopar Insiders as well, that roughly 68% of respondents on the poll said they want Dodge and Ram to merge once again. I think like 15 or 20% said they basically don't have an issue with it, and there's some that just don't seem to care at this point. When you look at polls like that, and this is something that I've heard for a long time as a motorsport guy, many people do want to see Dodge and Ram basically merge again. Many are confused. Isn't Ram a Dodge brand? Well, yes, they are a Dodge brand. But a few years back, they kind of parted ways working together, and it became their own separate company from the Stellantis side of things, which is why they're no longer together at this point. But I do think that there is a very likely possibility that this merger could happen in the near and not so distant future where Dodge and Ram is working together once again. If you continue seeing pushes like this, and I think especially with the rumors of Dodge going Cup Series racing in the near future, and a merger like this happening is just the thing that makes the most sense. If I had to make a prediction on when a merger like this will end up happening, my prediction currently at the moment is it'll be sometime in like 2027, maybe around 2028 or something like that, this merger is going to happen. And I guarantee you there have been preliminary talks on this where both of these parties and sides have had talks and have had conversations about trying to get a merger back going and things getting back to be worked together. And I really hope, again, that ends up being the case because I want to see both these parties get to work together once again. I think it's the best of both worlds for everybody in this situation. We'll see what happens on that front, but once again, I really hope we do get to see these two work together once again, as they both are in the same company with Stellantis, mind you. We'll see if that happens, and we'll see if they get to be merged in the near and also in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Denny Hamlin. Now, Denny Hamlin revealed on Actions Detrimental earlier this week, and Denny Delivers actually quoted this on his page as well on Twitter. Denny Hamlin apparently nearly had an opportunity to run the NASCAR Rally Auto Parts Series race at Daytona International Speedway. Now, why did Denny Hamlin not get the chance and opportunity to run the race at Daytona? According to them, is because a sponsor ended up backing out, which ended up being a big reason why Gio Ruggiero ended up driving not only last week at Daytona, but also this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway. I think we all talk about this, and we want to see Denny Hamlin make some starts in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series, especially at tracks like Daytona. A big reason because guys like Austin Hill continue to dominate these races in the NASCAR O'Reilly Auto Parts Series. And they want to see someone go out there and challenge these guys in these events because you look at how dominant Austin Hill has been. There is no denying that Austin Hill is a really, really solid and a really, really good super speedway racer. But many people want to see a challenge for Austin Hill where someone could beat him. The only guy most of the time that can beat Austin Hill at this track is either when he has a mechanical issue or Jesse Love's the only other guy that can beat him every single time. And I think that we want to see that. My prediction on the sponsor, what I think the sponsor was Yahoo. Yahoo has, of course, had association with Toyota for a while. I have a little bit of a feeling that that was the thing that kind of backed this from ending up happening. And I do think that it needs to happen at some point. Unfortunately, Talladega won't be available because Brent Cruz is going to run Talladega in the spring once he does turn 18. But I know there was talk of a fifth Joe Gibbs racing car coming into play. If you're Joe Gibbs Racing, you get that 11 car out there and let Denny Hamlin run some super speedway stuff, because unless you get these guys better at super speedways, it's going to come to a point where these guys like Denny are going to dominate these events going forward. Or Austin Hill, I should say, is going to continue dominating these super speedways going forward unless someone can find a way to challenge him. So we'll see if there could be a possibility of something like that happening where someone can go out there and challenge Austin Hill. So I think that'd be the best for everybody in motorsports if that could happen. And I pray it ends up happening where we see in the future a guy in Cup gets a shot and opportunity to go against Austin Hill in one of these super speedway events. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Adam Andretti. As it was announced earlier yesterday that Adam Andretti officially will join Tricon Garage in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series in 2026 for select Truck Series events. He will drive the number 5 truck for 4 NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series races this year. His first race will be this Saturday at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Then he'll run 3 of the 4 road course races on the schedule for the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. He'll run at St. Pete next week. Then he'll run at Watkins Glen in May, and his final race will be at San Diego. If you don't know the name Adam Andretti, he of course is the son of Aldo Andretti, who of course is the brother of Mario Andretti, one of the greatest motorsport drivers of all time. He also is the nephew or someone very close and very, very close to John Andretti, not John Andretti, actually, because John Andretti was his brother, but of course he's the cousin to Michael Andretti, a fantastic IndyCar driver. Now, when I looked up Adam Andretti's stats, he doesn't have a ton of starts in a lot of big league things. He does have a few ARCA starts. He does have a few starts, I think, on short tracks, I'm pretty sure. And he does have some Rolex starts. From what I could tell, he ran a lot in the Trans Am series, made about 42 or 43 starts in Trans Am, and did have some decent success in it, but wasn't the greatest driver there. And this has a lot to do with a lot of the, basically, there's a lot of questions on this. He is going to do, a big reason why I think he's running Atlanta is so he can be approved to run the road course races. I guess that's why they're doing this, and I do think it's a little bit of questionable to an extent to bring a guy who has never ran a NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series truck at a track where handling is going to matter quite a bit. I'm definitely a little bit surprised to see that he got approved for something like this. But then again, NASCAR's approval process is so finicky at this point that it seems like they'll approve anybody at this point. Quote unquote Natalie Decker and Cletus, unfortunately, even though I think Cletus does bring a lot to the sport. But of course, since he has the Andretti name, he does end up getting approved. I hope he does really well in this truck. I do think on the road courses he'll be fine. I just worry that he's going to cause an incident at Atlanta. I think that's a big concern to me, is whether he'll cause an incident at Atlanta going forward, and we'll see if that happens this week. Nonetheless, a great opportunity for Adam. Congrats to him on getting a chance and opportunity to join the Tricon Garage team for a few events this year. We'll see how he ends up doing this week in Atlanta and the few races he runs as well. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about stages/field racing. Now, one of the biggest talking points from the 2026 Daytona 500 was the field racing at the 500. Now, I think there was some field racing going on during the early stages of the Daytona 500, but stage 1 and stage 2, it was not egregious. You get to stage 3 from about lap 135 to about lap 160 to 165 is when a lot of the field saving was going on, when they were 3 wide across and going 170 miles an hour. I think most people will agree that kind of racing is not acceptable, and most fans do not want to see that kind of racing because it makes the Daytona 500 not look good, and it makes it on TV not look good for the drivers. To me, it looks like eye candy. But one of the things that people have suggested who are against the field racing is getting rid of the stages altogether and getting rid of the cautions. Now, obviously, I think stage cautions, no matter what, should be removed no matter what at this point. But here's the thing when it comes to stages. Even if you get rid of stages, and Bozy brought this up on his post, and Matt Weaver brought this up, even if you get rid of stage cautions, even if you get rid of stages altogether, you're still going to have the fuel saving going on. I think the big thing that needs to happen, and Dale Jr., Denny Hamlin brought this up on their podcast, we've got to get the drag out of these cars. A big reason why you see the fuel saving is so basically you save more time on pit road, so you don't have to fill up as much. That's why everyone field saves, and that's why sometimes you have people who lead a lot who fall way back and never are contenders once again. Because once you go to the 2x2 stuff, it becomes gridlock. Now, I think when the handling came into play, there was definitely opportunities to move up. But I think the big thing that needs to happen at this point is we've got to basically get the drag out of these cars. I think that's going to be the simple solution to fixing this problem and getting this figured out, because I think that's a simple thing that will fix the issues with the field racing and make people a little bit less upset when it comes to that. So I think that's the big solution that needs to happen, is getting the drag out of these cars, because I think that will be the thing that will solve the big issues and solve the big problems when it comes to the fuel saving that is currently going on in NASCAR at this particular point. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Carson Hocevar versus Carson Ware once again. Now, if you watch the NASCAR Rally Auto Parts Series race at Daytona International Speedway, after the race concluded, both Carson Ware and Carson Hocevar confronting each other on pit road. Carson Ware went up to Carson Hocevar saying he was really frustrated about what happened on the track on the white flag. According to what Carson Ware said, apparently there might have been some contact between both those guys on the racetrack basically on the last lap of the race, when Carson Hocevar was trying to make a pass on the white flag of the event, and Carson Ware was not a big fan because he said that Roger Kroof cleared him and a few other drivers cleared him as well at the end, and they didn't have an issue getting by him. Well, Carson Hocevar responded on a stream earlier today by basically saying that I'm a race car driver, and you want to be a race car driver, that's fine. You want to hang out in the back of the pack, that is fine. You do what you want to do. But basically, don't get upset at me, quintessentially, is pretty much what he said. He didn't really understand why Carson Ware was really angry and upset with him in that situation. Now, obviously, Carson Hocevar, we all know, has kind of rubbed people the wrong way over the years. But I'll be real and honest, in this case, in this situation, I don't really blame Carson Hocevar for calling out Carson Ware. Because there is no disrespect to Carson Ware, but Carson Ware is not the best race car driver out there. Carson Ware doesn't have any wins. He does have some late model wins, but he doesn't have any wins in his NASCAR career. Carson Hocevar does have wins in his NASCAR career. Carson Hocevar has 5 NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series wins and nearly won the Daytona 500 a couple days ago. And I do think that Carson Hocevar is a very talented guy who has a lot of promise and a lot of potential, can be very successful and a future champion in the Cup Series. I don't see Carson Ware doing that at this point. And I know Carson Ware has not had a ton of beefs in the sport. He hasn't gotten into a lot of issues with a lot of people. But Carson Ware seems like a guy that I wouldn't trust at this point. So when I look at this case and situation, I kind of side with Carson Hocevar on this stuff because I feel like the Carson Ware shouldn't be getting mad. If you're racing for a position, Carson Hocevar is trying to get owner's points for this team. You're not racing for much at this point. Your team was slow. You nearly went a lap down in the race. That's just a fact. They were slow, off the pace the whole entire race, and they just didn't show anything in the event and were major factors and contenders, which is why I think I find it funny to see him getting frustrated and upset about this. I get it in some instances, but at the same time, I don't really get it. I think some of the stuff he said was a little uncalled for, but it is what it is, and I do think Carson Hocevar does have a little bit of a point that he made, and I don't disagree with things that Carson Hocevar said in that stream, so I think he's right about a lot of things that he said in general, a lot of things I agree with, a lot of people also agree with at this point, a lot of people who do side with Carson Hocevar, and I don't think a lot of people really side with Carson where in that situation, kind of crazy to see 2 Carsons going against each other. Hey, let's just bring Carson Quaff in the mix and add him to the fights because it seems like we could have a triple Carson fight at some point. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, there's been a replay that surfaced, and shout out to Joseph Cergley for posting this on his Twitter page. But many of you probably saw the onboard of Kyle Busch in the late stages of the Daytona 500. Now, Kyle Busch on the final restart was restarting around 20th in the race, or 25th on the final restart. And coming to about 1 or 2 laps ago in this race, Kyle Busch basically decided to go ahead and back off and let the field charge off a little bit. I don't know if it was a spotter or Jim Pullman who was on the radio asking, are we out of gas? Well, Kyle Busch would go on the radio and said, what's the point of driving into the crash? We're going to end up in a crash if we continue. What's the point of going ahead and doing that? And then the big wreck finally happened as Kyle predicted on the white flag of the race like it's been the last couple years for the Daytona 500. And Kyle Busch wound up charging his way through both of the crashes and actually ended up finishing in 15th position. So Kyle Busch not only picked up a few spots, he gained 10 positions of where he was on the beginning of the final restart of the race. And Kyle Busch gained a few points. And Kyle Busch now is sitting in the top 16 in the regular season standings after the first race of the event, where he's currently sitting 14th in the regular season standings. Remind you, there's a win in your in anymore, so points are going to matter a lot more. Now, I've seen both sides of the case and situation. On one hand, I have seen people saying that Kyle Busch gave up and basically decided to give up in that situation and doesn't really care anymore. Obviously, it's a contract year for Kyle Busch, and there's a lot of talk about whether Kyle Busch is going to end up staying with Rich Schultz Racing or not in 2027. Then you have the other side, the people saying Kyle Busch actually played a really smart strategy here. I kind of lean more toward the side of playing a smart strategy. Kyle Busch knows, and I think we all know this, at least in recent Daytona 500s, that a lot of these Daytona 500s have turned into crapshoots and they have turned into complete wreck fest. And there's been a lot of these big wrecks and a lot of these chaotic wreck fests that end up taking place that cause a lot of damage on the track and a lot of cars to get destroyed. And Kyle Busch has been around the block long enough to know this. And especially with a new points format where points are going to matter a lot more, you want to put yourself in the best position to score as many points. So I think that's a big reason why Kyle Busch actually backed off. I think there's actually a lot of truth to that. I think Kyle Busch backed off to play smart strategy, but I also do agree to some of the frustration with the way things have been going at Rich Schultz Racing. I do think that also played a little bit of role, and I think there's some other things that also did play a role in some of that frustration. Nonetheless, I thought it was kind of a funny thing that Kyle Busch did right there to back off at the end. I think it was kind of a great thing that he did there. It's honestly kind of a cool thing he did in some instances. I know some people may not agree with that. That's fine and okay. But to me, I think it was honestly a very interesting move to see nonetheless. And I think for Kyle Busch, obviously in a contract year, showing some of that frustration, I get, though, the frustration in some instances, but at the same token, same time, I do think he actually played some smart strategy in that situation, played the cards right in a way, and I think it's an interesting strategy that Kyle Busch decided to go ahead and play there. Very good move on his part in some ways to try to play a little bit of strategy near the end of the race. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Michael Jordan. Now, Michael Jordan, there was an article that came out from Jeff Gluck earlier today about Michael Jordan's passion for the sport and winning the Daytona 500. And obviously, of course, we all know Michael Jordan was in a lawsuit with Jim France and everyone from NASCAR as of recently, back a couple months ago. But it's been a few months since the lawsuit is set up between NASCAR and 2011 Racing and Farmer Motorsports, which I think is a heel and win for the sport as a whole. And Michael Jordan, even during when he was getting up on the stand, showed his passion and love for the sport and the game of NASCAR. Michael Jordan's been a fan of the sport for a very long time. There's been photos that have surfaced since the mid-1980s when Michael Jordan was basically about to get in the NBA, and he was basically standing there with Richard Petty in the mid-1980s. He's been a fan of the sport for a very, very long time and has a major passion for it. That's why he got into NASCAR in the first place. And I do think that Michael Jordan, he means a lot to this sport. And I know a lot of people are saying, well, the only reason that NASCAR is, and you've seen it with Michael Jordan, right? You go on social media, and there has been a lot of talk about Michael Jordan. And I know that people talk about him being the face of the sport. I do think there is some problem with that, where the drivers, I do believe, need to become the face of the sport. But Michael Jordan also being a face of the sport is something very important. Michael Jordan led a change in the sport, which I think helped the sport in a big, big way. And I think his passion for the sport to really help grow and thrive the sport, I think that's also going to be very important down the road. You look at what's been going on. The Daytona 500 is still being talked about by major news networks going into Wednesday. This normally does not happen, by the way, where NASCAR is talked about as much. And it's not only going to be big for Michael Jordan, it could be big for Tyler Reddick too, since Tyler Reddick's the driver who won. His following has gone up on Instagram quite a bit, mind you. He's got multiple thousand followers on Instagram as of late, and he's a guy who has a lot of personality at the same time. So I think when you look at this, I think that Michael Jordan is going to bring a lot to the sport long term, and I think that there's a lot of great things when it comes to Michael Jordan that I really, really appreciate. I like a lot of things that Michael is doing, and I think he means a lot to the sport. He cares about the sport. He wants to see it succeed, and I really hope Michael continues being in the sport for many, many years to come, leading NASCAR toward a great direction. I think he's going to become an ambassador for the sport in the future. That's a prediction that many people have put out in recent years. I think there's a big passion for Michael. He cares about it, wants to see it succeed. I think you're going to continue seeing that, where Michael will continue being a fan of the sport for many years to come and continue being owner of the sport for a very long time and for the foreseeable future as well. Excited for Michael to stick around and continue being a fan for a long time. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Taylor Reimer and Jade Avedissian. Now, if you were on Twitter earlier today, you probably saw multiple posts from two female NASCAR/ARCA drivers. Taylor Reimer, who is driving a 77 car for Pinnacle Racing Group, and Jade Avedissian, who is going to be driving select starts for the Nitro Motorsports team in 2026, along with racing in pavement and late models as well. There's been a lot of talk about a certain female driver by the name of Natalie Decker. And Carson Elledge was the one on the Door Bumper Clear podcast who kind of sparked a lot of this conversation around female drivers in the industry and the respect as well. And I think both did a really good job putting out their own responses, where Taylor Reimer basically said, at one point, I was a college cheerleader for the state of Oklahoma. But when I was on a team, I represented my team and I represented the people that I associate with on the team in the college as well. That's like being a driver. You represent the fans, you represent the sponsors, and you represent everybody that associates with you. We have a responsibility as drivers, and basically that's what we want to be. Just drivers and focus on that. Not doing all this other stuff by being Instagram models, quintessentially, is what both of them were saying. I think what Taylor Reimer and Jade Avedissian have both been doing, they have both been doing this the correct way and the right way. And again, I know they didn't mention Natalie Decker straight up, but that post without question from both of them is about Natalie Decker. Look, Natalie Decker has become under a lot of fire this week for what happened at Daytona International Speedway, where she ran into Sam Mayer. She was definitely not fully on the brakes, runs into Sam Mayer, and destroys his car a lot more. And basically says, why did Sam Mayer come up the racetrack like that? That just pisses me off. Well, Natalie, you got to use the brakes, sweetheart. You're in a race car. You have been racing in this series in motorsports now for nearly a decade. You were racing in ARCA 8 years ago. You have to learn to use the brake pedal. This isn't ARCA where the ARCA brakes don't really work that well. You have to learn to use the brake pedal. And I understand that she's not the only one that didn't have a great weekend. Cletus is a prime example. They were talking about the approval process for NASCAR. I think we all can agree for the most part that Natalie Decker probably should not have been out on that racetrack. When I look at people like Taylor Reimer and Jade Avedissian and Isabel Robusto and Lainey Bice and other female drivers, these ones I'm mentioning are doing it the correct and right way. Then you have people like Tony Breidinger and Natalie Decker. And unfortunately, in the instance to Hailie Deegan, though Hailie Deegan, to be fair, she did come from the Deegan family, and also she did have some success in the racing series that she ran it and did get a few wins in the ARCA West series. And I think she'll run pretty well in the ARCA West series as well. But I think for female drivers, there's a way to represent the sport, and I think there's a lot of them. And I look at Taylor Reimer. She's someone who I think has a lot of promise. I think she's going to do really well with Pinnacle throughout the year in running that 77 machine. Jade Avedissian, everyone is very high on her. Dale Jr. even said that if there's a truck team he formed, she'd be behind the wheel. I think Jade Avedissian is the one, in my opinion, that could be the female driver that steps up and jumps up to that level and could be a driver who wins races in Cup. I think she's that good and talented, and you look at people who've talked about her, and they're like, yeah, Jade is really, really good. So I would love to see what she could do in some truck races this year. I hope that happens. But I think for female drivers, and Natalie Decker, this is a message. I'm not sure if she'll be able to make more starts and recover from this at this point. So I think some of this drama is kind of crazy to see that you have people finally talking about it. I respect them, though, for finally sticking up and talking about this. I think this is stuff that needed to be said. And I agree with Taylor Reimer, Jade Avedissian, 100% that people need to start acting like race car drivers and professionals and not act like Instagram models that are drivers at this point, in my opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Tyler Reddick and Michael Jordan. Now, if you've been going on NBA Twitter, if you've been going on Twitter over the last couple days, there has been a controversy, or should I say a non-controversy, and a thing that got blown way out of proportion on Twitter. So after the race concluded and the Daytona 500 was done, everyone was celebrating in Victory Lane, including Tyler Reddick's son, Bo Reddick. There was a lot of ice that was thrown, and there was a lot of Gatorade and other fluids that were thrown around when they were basically on there. Michael Jordan went up to Bo to wipe off the back of his shirt because there was ice on the back of his shirt. You can clearly see in the video that Michael Jordan was wiping off the ice on the back of his shirt. People were accusing him of touching Bo Reddick in the very inappropriate way. And people are saying, oh, Michael Jordan's doing this and Michael Jordan's doing that. And a lot of people got this thing blown way out of proportion, in my opinion. First of all, I think this story should have never blown up the way it did. When you have people like Stephen A. Smith defending Michael Jordan, and I'm not the biggest fan of Stephen A. Smith, but when you have people like Stephen A. Smith defending Michael Jordan, when you have a lot of people who are in the NASCAR industry defending him, and by the way, most of the NASCAR side of ththings do not think that Michael Jordan did anything wrong here. It's really the NBA Twitter side. You go to that side of Twitter is definitely a little bit of a mess from what I've seen. But in this case, in this situation, even Tyler Reddick came out today and basically said, I didn't really see anything wrong with what Michael Jordan did there. He didn't do anything wrong. Reminder that Bo Reddick is the godson of Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan's the godfather of Tyler Reddick's kid. So, he's close to the family. Plus, do you really think that Michael Jordan is going to do what some of you are assuming he's going to do when you have a lot of adults in Victory Lane? You also have a lot of security there. I mean, come on, guys. Let's be real and honest here. Do you think that Michael Jordan, one of the greatest NBA players of all time, the best one, you think a guy who just won the Daytona 500, you think a guy who wants to move the sport in the right and correct direction, do you genuinely think that Michael Jordan wants to mess up his whole entire life, his whole entire career, and ruin his own life and image just for some clicks? No, absolutely not. I don't understand how this became a big thing, and I'm glad people are calling this stuff out because this is something that should have not been blown up. I think it's nonsense, and it's kind of crazy that Reddick even had to address this to begin with, but I'm glad he did because I think this is totally unnecessary stuff that people brought up on Twitter, and it's not normal people. It's people on the NBA side of things that wanted to blow up a story that should not have been blown up, and I think it's definitely uncalled for. This story became a big thing. Glad to see those cleared up at this point. Again, Red did have a problem with it, and I don't understand why people are mad at all at Michael Jordan here. I don't get it. Michael, by the way, happy late birthday to Michael Jordan by the time he's watching this. But again, I think his story should never have been blown up, and I think his story was definitely way blown out, way out of proportion overall, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode as we're talking about the Daytona 500 and some of the post-race shenanigans and the antics that happened on pit road. So after Daytona 500 had concluded, there were a couple certain incidents that happened on pit road. Let's first begin by talking about the Ashes incident. There was something posted, I think, by the Breaking 911 account on Twitter where someone apparently had maybe, thrown ashes onto the racetrack right as they were wrecking on the final lap of the race. And someone threw ashes on the racetrack, and a lot of those ashes, funny enough, blew right back in the face of the individual that threw the ashes on the track. I guess you could say karma came back to hit you a little bit. First thing I want to say on that, I don't think this is as egregious as what we're going to talk about here in a second. But let me say this. NASCAR fans are really, really crazy, and I know there's a lot of people that are calling for a ban of this individual who threw the ashes onto the track. I do think the fan probably shouldn't be banned for this. I'm going to be real and honest. I don't think this is bannable to me. Fans have done crazy stuff like this before. It's nothing new. It's nothing uncommon. I've seen stuff. I've never been to Talladega, but I've seen stories about Dega where people have done a lot of crazy and wild things. I think it's a stupid thing to do and pretty dumb, and I would not recommend doing it. But sometimes fans, when they have drinks, they get drunk and other things, you're going to see situations like this where people are going to do crazy things. So while I don't agree with what the guy did, I don't think he should be banned completely. Let's talk about the other individual. During an interview that Daniel Suarez is having with Fox Sports Deportes, about 10 seconds in the clip that they posted, a fan came up and heckled Daniel Suarez, where he basically went two times, 47-47, and then patted Daniel Suarez on, I believe, the side of the shoulder, and I believe also on the chest as well, and then pretty much walked away. And Daniel Suarez was taken back a little bit for a second, but he actually got through the interview and didn't really budge throughout the interview at that point. Now, here's a couple things that need to be talked about. A lot of people are bringing up the political side of things, and I'm going to make this clear. What I'm about to say here has nothing to do with politics. This has a lot to do with being a decent human being when you have the opportunity. When it comes to having the opportunity to be on pit road, there's a couple things you need to do. Number one, be a decent human being on pit road. One, do not interrupt interviews that are going on, especially with big-time companies. Get out of the way of those shots. I know people walk by and they wave their hands and stuff, but they're not completely getting in front of the shots and getting in the way. That individual was getting in the way and bringing some things up. Now, I'm going to give the benefit down and also say the guy could have been talking about Ricky Stenhouse Jr., and I think that certainly is a possibility that could have ended up happening. I'm not going to get to that other side. But don't interrupt interviews. I think it's very much one thing. And number two, if you're unessential, do not be on pit road. Just get off to the other side and don't be getting in the way of interviews going on. Media, you're going to have situations where you're going to have interviews going on. They're allowed on pit road. Do not get involved in this situation and make it about you. And number three, if you're given the opportunity, do not touch a driver on pit road. We all learned this when we were little kids, right? Keep your hands to yourselves at all times. Just like with the steering wheel during qualifying where basically Noah Gragson got a penalty. But back to the point. Keep your hands to yourself at all times. That was what made me more mad than the interruption. And I think that people say, and I've seen a lot of people that are defending this on social media, and I don't get it, to be honest. I don't understand how anybody can go on social media and defend someone doing something like this. It's unacceptable that anyone can do this. Now, here's what I think should happen. Number one, the guy's hard car, who probably got access from somebody close to him, the guy's hard car should 100% be pulled. He should never be allowed back on pit road ever again. Now, I don't want to be too harsh and say he should be banned from going to NASCAR races. If he does this, if he gets to go to races, I'd be okay with that. But this stuff is not acceptable. And this ruins it for people like me who would like to eventually down the road get access, because we've seen multiple incidents before. Last year during the Coke 600, Daniel Suarez's former teammate Ross Chastain, a fan, came up and stole Ross Chastain's cap. And I was not happy about that either. And I think there's consistency from people in the industry that doing stuff like this is just unacceptable and totally uncalled for. Again, Show some decency on pit road. It's not that difficult, and it's not that hard to be a decent human being. Don't be a prick, quintessentially. Don't be a jackass on pit road and make yourself look like a fool. Because now you might ruin your own life. You may lose the opportunity to go to races again, and you might put yourself in a position. If you get pit passes, just be a smart individual. Don't do anything stupid, and don't put yourself in a bad position, because that fan may have hurt his own life, and it's unfortunate because he put himself in his position, and now he's a dumb ass for doing that, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the final major story of today's episode, as we're talking about Dodge once again. Now, there continues to be a lot of talks and conversations about potentially Dodge being back in the NASCAR Cup Series very, very soon. Now, how early could Dodge return to the Cup Series? Well, we could potentially see Dodge in the NASCAR Cup Series as early as next year in 2027. As reported by the Ramming is Racing account, they continue to hear that there continues to be a push for them to go NASCAR Cup Series racing in 2027. Now, there is still a potential possibility that this could get pushed back all the way to the 2028 year. But there continues to be a lot of talks about which teams could also be in the running to potentially go to this potential program in 2027. Shall they go NASCAR Cup racing? We have seen the Dodge program and the people over Stellantis and Tim Kuniskis make some really crazy and kind of wild moves where they make moves that you think, okay, they're not going to be able to pull this off. And they've been able to pull off some really crazy things to start 2026. Bringing Tony Stewart back to the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series is a prime example of a big move that I don't think anybody expected about a year ago. And now there's potential we could see people like Casey Kane and maybe at one point Cletus McFarland make a start with the College Racing program in the near and not so distant future. But I think it'd be really exciting to see Dodge come back. The last time we saw Dodge in the NASCAR Cup Series as a full backing was only back in 2012. That year, Brad Keselowski would go on to win the championship for the organization of Team Penske when Penske was still a Dodge team. They have plans to continue being in NASCAR 2013 in the Cup Series, but unfortunately, they did not continue that partnership in 2013 because the team they were going to get, Andretti, basically backed off a little bit. Kurt Busch and Matt Kenseth were expected to be the two original drivers who were going to get behind the wheel of that program in 2013, and of course, that did not end up happening at that particular point. But then you look at this. They basically came back, and now they're in talks to potentially get back in the Cup Series in the future. So now my question is, what teams could be potentially in the running for joining Dodge if they do come back in 2027, or let's say they wait till 2028? Well, one team you're going to see for sure is College Racing. College Racing is no longer getting support from Chevrolet going into this year. They don't have any support right now, and despite the fact that they've shown some speed, you don't see any of these Chevy logos, any of the Chevy badges, and you're going to probably see throughout the year some of the Dodge and Ram sponsorships on their Cup Series cars at some point. They're the one that's a big no-brainer at this point. With the Ram program they have in association with Dodge, they're going to be the team that moves up. The big question is, who will be the drivers for that program? Well, AJ Allmendinger is going to be one of the drivers without question. AJ's been making some starts with their Craftsman Truck Series program as well, and I think AJ will, without question, be one of the drivers that ends up getting behind the wheel of a Kaulig car again. Plus, he does have a long-term contract with Kaulig. I think that goes to the end of the decade, around 2029 or 2030. So I think AJ Allmendinger will be for sure back with the program and staying if they do go to Dodge in 2027. Then you got to look at that second car. I'm going to be real and honest. I do not think that Ty Dillon is going to be back with College Racing in 2027. Here's why. Ty Dillon is fully associated with ECR. And yes, he has had times kind of cut ties with the family, at least for certain parts. He, of course, wasn't with the College or any sort of RCR association for about a year or so when he was with the Toyota brands of Joe Gibbs Racing and the Gaunt brothers. But I think that he's back in the RCR family in some way, shape, or form. So I think Ty Dillon, without question, will not be back with the team. And Ty Dillon will go somewhere else, maybe RCR, maybe replaces Kyle Busch somehow if Kyle Busch doesn't return. So who takes over the second car? I mentioned Kyle Busch. If Kyle Busch wants to get a fresh start and can't find a way over Aspire Motorsports for 2027, I would look at Kyle Busch being a prime candidate who could potentially get behind the wheel of that car in 2027, because I don't think Kyle Busch is going to return to Richard Childress Racing in 2027 more than likely. So I think Kyle Busch will be someone to watch out for as a potential candidate for that team. But then you have to look at other potential free agents. I don't see Tyler Reddick being a candidate for this. I don't see Alex Bowman going to a downgrade with Kaulig. I think then you have to look at others. Brendan Buttery Queen, Justin Haley are the two that come to mind. Both I expect to have really strong years in trucks, and I think Justin Haley is the lead candidate for that because Justin Haley has prior Cup experience. I think he's in the running to be that guy who will get that second car in 2027. But I don't think Hall Racing is going to be the only team that makes that shift. I think Rickware Racing is the other team I'm thinking about, right? Rickware Racing is one that makes the most sense. They're a team that's not really loyal to manufacturers. I know they just signed a one-year deal with the organization of RCR, kind of signed a deal to work with their ECR company and going back to Chevrolet. But I think Rickware would be the one that makes sense. I think they have association with Dodge currently in the NHRA right now, so I think they're going to be one of the other teams that potentially goes over. One team that I could see as a surprise is RFK Racing. When Dodge was trying to come back in NASCAR in 2022 and they were rumored to have talks and conversations about potentially coming back, one of the teams that was talked to was RFK Racing. Remember, Brad Keselowski prior used to be a Dodge driver when he drove for Team Penske, got Dodge's last championship. So I do believe that RFK could be a sleeper candidate to go over there. I know some mentioned Hayek Motorsports. Hayek would certainly be interesting. I'm not even sure at this point if Hayek Motorsports is even going to continue to exist in 2027. There is a chance they may exist, but I'm not sure if that's going to be the case for the 2027 year. But to me, the three front runners are calling as a no-brainer. And then the second one is I think there's only going to be two teams that are going to switch over. I think then it will end up being either RFK or Rick Ware. So I mentioned Trackhouse. If you see Honda come back, which I don't know if Honda's going to come in now if the announcement is made in IndyCar, but Honda would be the one that Trackhouse would go to because if they have drivers under contract with GM, that being Connor Zilch and Shane Van Gisbergen, so you have the contracts you have to look at this point. It'll be interesting to see what happens, but there continues to be talks about this, and we'll see if they do end up going Cup Series racing potentially by 2027. So that's for today's Law NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. Notifications on so if when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram and support me on Patreon as well. Let's get some more of that and comment your thoughts below into today's episode. You think Dodge will be back in the Cup Series next year or 2028? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about the stuff that happened at Daytona, like the fan heckling Daniel Suarez in pit road? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Later today on the channel, we'll have the O'Reilly Auto Parts race picks for Atlanta Motor Speedway. Then tomorrow, we'll have Cup Series race picks for Atlanta. And we'll talk about some of the news I did not talk about from today. Push it to the video. They'll be going out on potentially on Friday, of course, or even Thursday. May push the race picks back to Friday. If there's a lot of news today, we'll have to wait and see. Got a lot of content coming in. People like Haley D and Shane Van Gisbergen, Carl Edwards, Kurt Busch, Kyle Busch, Bubba Wallace, Ross Chastain, Sheldon Creed, Sam Ayer, Frankie Muniz, Cletus, Yvonne Dodge, Ram, Brad Keselowski, Connor Zilch, Junior Motorsports, Tony Stewart, Casey Kane, Robbie Gordon, Brendan Buttery Queen, Tony Breidinger, other stuff like that on the channel in the coming days and weeks. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode. I'll see you guys next time for more great awesome NASCAR content, other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, buddy.